Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out today and for your patience. Your attendance and book purchases let us have events like this, and so we are so glad to have you, and so glad to have the honor of hearing from N.K. Asante about his book, Nephew, a memoir in 4-part harmony. N.K. Asante is an award-winning filmmaker, recording artist, distinguished professor, and the best-selling author of Buck, a Memoir. His essays have been published in the New York Times and USA Today, and his inspirational story, The Blank Page, is featured in the #1 New York Times bestseller, Chicken Soup for the Soul, 20th Anniversary Edition. That's among so many other things that MK will let us know as well. We hope you enjoyed the event. Thank you again. And remember to grab a copy of Nephew up front after the reading if you haven't already. And we will do all signing after the talk, so stick around for that. If anybody needs to run, you can always give us your book and we'll get it signed for you. Okay. Thank you.
What's up, y'all? How you doing? Good. I don't need this mic, do I?
No.
Do you need the mic, Alex?
Yeah, you're good.
Good for the YouTube and all that?
It's okay.
We're good? All right, cool. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Good. Good. It's good to be here. This is like the most local event I've ever had. I'm like 10, 15 minutes away from here. A lot of people don't know that. So it was beautiful to be able to just drive over here real quick. Most of my events are far. I was just on the road last week and the week before, so it's nice to be at the crib and see some familiar faces, you know what I mean? So thanks for that introduction, Alex. Thanks for having me, Flyleaf. Thank you for coming out. I want to start by kind of going back. See this briefcase? Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was my mom's. You'll hear about her a little bit. A lot of bit today. Because I'll be talking about kind of my journey with Buck, with Nephew, and just, how I got to be here right now. And we all got to be in this space together. How many people have read Buck? Anybody read Buck in here? Okay, cool. So it's good just because I kind of have an idea of, some people are familiar with the story. Nephew is really like a follow-up to Buck. And before I even get into Buck or Nephew, let me just say, my mantra in life, the reason why I write, the reason why I'm an artist is because I believe if you make an observation, you have an obligation. And so that's really what drives me. A lot of my work is observational, meaning that's the origin of what I'm seeing. I was just thinking about my mom the other day. I think about her a lot, obviously. She passed in 2021. I'll talk to you more about her story, but my mom was a choreographer and a dancer. She grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. So I did my first event in Brooklyn the other day. That's where I started the Nephew tour. I'm about to say Buck tour. That's where I started the Nephew tour in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. That's where my mom is from. And I did this event up there, and I was thinking a lot about my mom because it was hot. And people were outside, and it's double Dutch weather. You know what I mean? And I grew up in Philly, so double Dutch was always a thing. You know what I mean? As you heard, it was just a big deal. You know what I mean? My cousins, all my girl cousins would play double Dutch. If you don't know what double Dutch is, it's a jump rope. But the way we do it in the black community is very specific. You know what I mean? And so, and there's songs that go with it, and there's a rhythm, and you got to have a certain. And if you ain't got it, then don't even come near the sidewalk. So my mom, that was her thing growing up, is the double Dutch. That was the beginning of her introduction to rhythm, to timing, to polyrhythm, to all of these, what she would call ancestral rhythms. You know what I mean? Things that you can't necessarily put your finger on, like in terms of when you think about its provenance, like where exactly it came from, but you can think ancestrally, I'm connected to this. When I hear those African drums beating, there's something that connects me. And so she felt that connection. And so I'm saying that to say, again, I said observation, obligation. So my mom's work, like they're having a retrospective in Philly for my mom in a couple weeks. Her dancers are. And they're putting on a lot of her dances. And, she had this piece, my favorite piece was called Double Dutch Chronicles. because she used the rhythms of double dutch and other things that were environmental to basically create a new style of dance called mafundala. That was her technique, the mafundala technique. And so, you know, and some people in here even knew my mom, so I had to pause for a minute because I saw, you know, oh my God, yeah, he remembers my mom, and so it's all very special to me. So, but my mom created mafundala, and again, it was coming out of double dutch, and then she would use things that, like, one of my other favorite pieces is called Anthem. I remember when I was young, I used to watch it, and I was a little confused as a child, but it made more and more sense. But the pieces she would do were storytelling. So she would have an anthem, for example, it was about homelessness in America. So in the beginning, you see people in rags and they're drunk, and you see the bottles and you see all these things. And by the way, both of my parents were educators at Temple University, which is in North Philadelphia. To get to Temple, you got to go down Broad Street. Broad Street is, no matter where you're coming from, and Broad Street is the most eventful street, you know? It's broad in terms of all the different ranges, stuff you're going to see, you know what I mean? And so my mom, but she would incorporate this into her dance, like the idea of homelessness. Or, for example, anybody ever hear the move bombing? You guys know what the move bombing is? So if you haven't heard of it, this is like crazy American history. But in the 80s, a bomb was dropped, 2 bombs actually, in a residential area in Philadelphia, on Osage Avenue. It killed men, women, children. The police did this order of the mayor, and they were the group that they dropped the bomb on was called Move, and this was a back to earth, really nonviolent. They were a nonviolent back to earth kind of group, but they were alternative lifestyle, and they had some complaints in the neighborhood. They were going through it with the police, but the police they dropped this bomb, killed lots of people, but the only adult survivor was a woman named Ramona Africa. So when I was growing up, you know, I used to see Ramona Africa in my crib. You know what I mean? She would be talking to my mom. They would be building. She had these big, thick locks, like this big, you know? And my mom, one of her most known pieces was called Ramona. And it was about Ramona Africa and, you know, the surviving. And it was, you know, so it had the helicopters and all of this was. So I say all that to say, if you make an observation, you have an obligation, right? That's how I started, because that was like basically the mantra that inspires me. And I think about, where does that come from? It comes from my mom, probably, in so many ways, because so many things that people may call everyday, you know, like double dutch, you know, but she elevated those things to sacred art, you know, and to sacred performance. And I think that was something that I saw at a young age, just her doing that. And, you know, and even hip hop to me is an example of that in some ways, you know, in terms of taking things that are everyday and local and then elevating it to a kind of a sacred place in terms of art and artistry, you know. So that's some context into just why I create. And you know, Buck, my first memoir, I've written 5 books, but this was my first memoir. It came out in 2013. I had to go down a step because I was about to fall. I said, yeah, you know, you gotta just go with it. But Buck was my first memoir, you know, and I love the title Buck. For me, I wanted a title, you know, when I first started writing, I had these long titles, and I was like, with Buck, I really need a title that's short, but that says a lot in a little, right? And that's what I love about Proverbs, is because Proverbs are short, but they say they're long, right? Short but long, right? And so I wanted a word that just, and again, going back to my mom, you know, I remember I was thinking of all types of titles for my memoir, and they were just none of that. I was just, you know, this bad. People don't know, writers come up with a lot of bad ideas. You know what I mean? Like, if you saw all of the potential titles, you'd be like, yo, what was you thinking? But anyway, but I remember when Buck hit me, and it all came to me, just all the different meanings. Young Buck, Buck Wild, Buck Shots, Buck Town, Slave Buck, Black Buck, Make Buck, Buck Now. You know what I mean? Just, wow, this represents everything. So I called my mom, like, you know, And she knew I was searching for the title. So all I said to her was, Mom, Buck. She was like, that's it. You know what I mean? She was like, that's it, sweetheart. That's how she was talk. But yeah, my mom, she was a fan. And what I did in that book is, Buck is a coming of age story about how I really discovered, you know, my love for writing, for creativity, but also how I navigated just my really unique childhood in Philadelphia. You know, my brother, who I'm very close to, his name is Uzi, and when I was growing up, he was incarcerated. And in the book, he gets incarcerated, so you kind of, you know, go through his journey, or you see some of his journey. But I want to share a little bit about, just about my brother, so you have a sense of who he is. His name is Uzi, by the way. So I say, and this is how it goes. Me following Uzi in everything, everywhere, like his little black JanSport, covered in marks a lot, strapped to his back, koala style. Anywhere, any place. He does it, I do it. He tries it, fuck it, I'm trying. He can't shit, why can't I? Sometimes I even duck like him under doorways, even though he's way taller, and I don't even need to duck. I guess I just do it because Uzi's more than my big brother. He's my idol. I don't care that he's taller and older, smarter. I wouldn't even really know his age if people weren't always bringing that shit up, talking about, you can't do this, you can't do that. Why? Because he's 16 and you're 12, they say. I follow Uzi to sweaty Badlands house parties that always end in crazy shirtless rumbles with everybody howling, north side in the middle of the street. To Broad and Rockland to cop dime bags from one of the dusty bodegas with nothing but baking soda and expired Bizquick on the shelves. To freestyle ciphers on South Street that the nut-ass police always break up for no reason. To crack on Jones getting off the L at 69th Street like, yo, shorty, let me holler at you for a minute. To scale the fence, to watch Sad-Eye, the Jordan of street ball. Hoop at 16th and Susquehanna, to skate the ledges and steps at Love Park until we get chased away by the cops. To bomb the Orange Line subway with Sharpies and Kiwi polish sticks. And now to joyride through Philly in a stolen wheel. Being with Uzi makes me feel invincible. Like nothing bad can happen to us. Like nothing and nobody can hurt us. I feel unfuckwittable. So that's Uzi. That's, you know, you get a sense of who Uzi is. He's someone who's very close to me, and I emulate him and want to be like him. And that gets me in trouble. So in this book, you know, I go through journeys of getting kicked out of different schools and just not taking things seriously, following Uzi's path. But ultimately, not following Uzi's path and really discovering a love for literature, for writing. I have an epiphany in this book where I talk about, oh, now I see why reading was illegal for Black people during slavery. And I, you know, because that always so deep to me. And I even in NEPHEW, I'll talk about the drums being outlawed. You know, these things are very deep to me, that people would go so far to make it illegal, right? Like, you know, it's one thing to be like, I'll put that book down. It's another thing to, like, you know, make up some laws and get people vote, you know, and they're actually like put that shit on paper, like you can't read, it's illegal, right? And so that's always deep, and you wonder, damn, why would you want to limit why would you not want to let someone read? Like, you know what I mean? You know, but it's very deep, right? You know, because we think in words, right? We think in words. So if you limit the language people have, right, you're also limiting the ability they have to maybe conceive of certain ideas, you know? Even though the instinct and the will to be free is always there, the language to articulate it isn't there because you don't have it, right? You can't produce what you don't have, right? So that's the thing. And so in this book, you learn about kind of that journey for me. So it starts when I'm like 12, 13, it ends when I graduate high school, basically. And Uzi's been incarcerated most of that time. And my mom's journals are interspersed through Buck. So you get a chance to hear my mom's voice. I write all my memoirs in the first person present tense. So you're in the moment with me, you know. So this book, you're hearing 14, 15, 16-year-old Milo, you know, talk. And my mom's journals, which I used to read secretly because we didn't talk, you know, so my thing would be to just read her journals. And I would learn a lot about her, how she grew up. She would talk about trauma from when she was young, about things that were going on with me, my brother, trying to raise 2 young Black men in Philly, my pop, they were going through a divorce. All of this stuff was in her journals. And so that's how I would learn from, what's going on. And when it came time to write the book, my mom thought it would be a good idea to use the journals. She was totally on board with it. She thought that it would help have a discussion about mental health that sometimes Black people don't have that discussion. She wanted more Black people to have that discussion about mental health. And my mom went through different mental health, issues, and she wrote about them, very honestly. And so she kind of felt that truth would help other people. And she was definitely, she was right about that. That was her hunch. And so I interspersed her journal through the book. I also interspersed rap lyrics throughout the book. It's the 90s during this time, so it's lyrics from artists that we were listening to. The lyrics are always very resonant with what's going on in the narrative, right? They're not random. They kind of have it's another narrative going on with the lyrics. And even the different artists that you see kind of represent a kind of growth, right? So it might start out with lyrics from Noriega and you end with lyrics from, Mos Def or something, so it's you see a journey of also what someone is interested in. And so anyway, that's kind of the style of writing that I do. And that's how I did Buck. And so Nephew, now getting to Nephew, because I think I finished Buck. The only other quick thing about Buck is just introducing people to language, right? So Buck is a story about me, my brother, my mom, my family, my dad, but also Philadelphia as a character. Philadelphia is definitely a character in Buck. It's got its own style, its own language, right? In fact, I have in the very beginning, I remember when I first sent the book to my editor, he loved it. He just was like, what does John mean? Because it's a word that I use a lot in there, and the word is Jawn. And I say John could mean anything. So the reason why this is in here is because my editor is like, you gotta say something, like people don't know, you know what I mean? Everybody's not from Philly. So I'm like, all right. So I had to give a little, explanation about it. So I say John could mean anything. John could mean anything. Person, place, or thing. Sometimes if we're telling a story and we don't want people to know what we're talking about, we'll plug John in for everything. The other day I was at the joint around the corner with the joint from down the street, right? We get to the joint, right? The bull on this joint, not knowing I had that joint on me, man, it was about to be on in that joint. So that's an example of me and my brother, not necessarily with that conversation, but an example how John could be coded, right? Like if me and you are talking, and I say, yo, we still doing that joint later? Or we going to that joint? And then darn, well, I mean, you would have to know so much context in order to understand that conversation. Now, where that becomes very deep is when you think about the history of Black people in America. One thing that's real deep is that, like, I was born in Zimbabwe, but I've been to many countries in Africa, and I'm always fascinated by how many languages are spoken in Africa. Like, in Nigeria alone, there's over 400 languages. So people think, oh, you're Nigerian, you must know. What? Like, it's hundreds of languages. So, literally in one country. And then you start thinking about, wow, African people were kidnapped from the coast of Africa, enslaved, brought to the Americas, and they didn't all speak the same language. We have 400 languages in Nigeria alone. So how do you navigate a situation where you're all enslaved in America, not from the same ethnic groups necessarily, not speaking the same languages, but the common denominator becomes English. You all have to learn English because the oppressor, the enslaver, is saying, this is the language you're going to learn. This is the language I'm going to give you orders in. This is the language, right? And so you're learning this language, but it's in the context of oppression. How do you get free? How can you emancipate? How can you liberate yourself if you are speaking in a language that's given to you in the context of oppression? And that's where Black English becomes so, not just so beautiful, but also so emancipatory. You start to understand that the whole origin of it was about freedom and survival, right? So for example, if you had, let's say back in the day, this was a plantation and you had enslaved Africans in this room and they said something and let's say some enslavers were in the distance, they could hear, right? And the people say, did you hear that MK escaped the plantation? Because you know I'd have been definitely on the escape. You hear MK escaped the plantation, and somebody say, MK escaped? That's a bad, right? And they say that, and they say that, right? Yeah, that's a bad. Y'all know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. But that's a bad. Now, if the enslaver hears that, the enslaver is gonna think, yeah, it's a bad. Yeah, he's bad. You know what I mean? But everybody who is enslaved know that if you say that's a bad, then what you're really doing is celebrating me, right? You're celebrating that courage. You're celebrating that spirit. You're celebrating what I've done. But again, the enslaver only hears the words, bad. And so much of Black English has been derived, created, and continues to function in this space of, as soon as the enslaver realizes that bad actually means good, then obviously we start saying something different. Like the language is always changing, right? That's why you come back to the hood, you've been gone for 2 weeks and we don't say that no more. You know what I mean? Like, my young bucks, I was in Philly the other day. My young bucks like, we don't say that. You don't want OG. Like, but I'm like, I was just here, so, but again, like I said, do you look at the history of that? The history of that is rooted in how can we talk about freedom, right? But they're listening. You know what I mean? Like, they're listening, and this is their language. This isn't even our language. So how can we actually talk? Only way we can do it is by freaking the language. We have to use the same words, but with completely different meanings. You know what I mean? And that's what we do. And that's, again, the legacy of hip hop. So, okay. That's just, I haven't even got to Nephew yet. I'm sorry, y'all. So I had to give you a little bit of context, though, just because, it's important. Nephew is my new book. And it's my best book, in my opinion. It really is. But it's called a Nephew, a Memoir in 4-part harmony. And many of the things that I did in Buck are carried over into this book. In some ways, it could be considered a follow-up to Buck. It's a different story, but a lot of the same characters are in this story. The same people are in this story. So, for example, what this story is, though, let me just give you the nuts and bolts of it. Nephew is a letter that I started writing to my nephew when he was in a coma, shot 9 times at Temple University in Philadelphia. Okay? This is the context of Nephew. Okay? Now, my nephew, Nasir, was like my first son. Like, I have children now, but when my nephew was born, I didn't have children. And he was like, I never felt I had a big brother, but I never felt like someone's big brother or big, I could show you things and teach you things. So this was my first experience with that. And I really loved it. It was really powerful for me. But, so my nephew and I are very tight. And, so it's devastating to me, when he got shot. And some of the things I started to think about are all the things that I haven't talked to him about or told him, right? And so that gives you a little bit of context. Another thing that's really important to understand about this situation is that, I'm very close with my brother, as you heard in Buck. And, my brother is an incredible artist. He's really a genius. And, but so many things have happened in life that just make it difficult. So anyway, so my brother and my nephew gets shot when he's 18. My brother and my nephew never met before. So let me just run that back. My brother, who I'm very close with, and my nephew, who I'm very close with, have never met, okay? They both live in North Philly, okay? So it's not like one of them is in Calabasas somewhere, you know what I mean? And the other one is in Tampa. They're literally in the same hood, right? But have never met, may have seen each other on the street, but wouldn't, so never met. They both record they're both artists, and they both record at the same music studio. It's crazy. right? I have to, like I said, I have to kind of just walk you through this so you kind of understand the context before I even get into the story. Just so you understand. So my nephew and my brother is Uzi, the same one that's in Buck, the same one I look up to, and you know, all of that. And so, and my nephew and my brother also communicate with each other through their music. They're both extraordinary lyricists. So like, they say things to each other, about each other, around each other, you know, but again, have never been in a room and had a conversation, right? Never even talked on the phone, right? So, and there's no question, like, it wasn't like a thing, just a little caveat. It wasn't a thing of like, is this my son? Like, no, it's 100% his son. It's not, there's no ambiguity about whose child it is. It's his son. It's been about stepping up, right? So anyway, give you an example of what I mean when I say they talk to each other in their lyrics. My nephew will say things in a lyric, like he has a song that I talk about in this book. He says, you know, in fact, you know what I'll do? I'll give you I want to start with an excerpt from Nephew so you can kind of get a sense of the book. I think that might be better than to just jump right into the lyric. So this is chapter 1. Dear nephew, it's 3 a.m. My veiny hands shake like leaves as I write you. You're unconscious in the ICU at Temple University Hospital. Rain streams outside, tears inside. The sky is off black. The clouds are thick like blunt smoke, and the air is hot and heavy with pain. Shot screams, moans, blood, piss, smoke, cries, prayer. I can smell the stress. You are nowhere near alone. I'm in the ER lobby with your mom, cousin Crystal, Big T, Bump, Grandma Beverly, and what feels like half of North Philly. Mounds of cheekbones, crescent lips, and scripture tattoos. I read only God can judge me on Bump's brick of a forearm. Your principal from the Crefeld School, George, is here too. Heartbroken and steely-eyed, he palms his forehead in shock and utter disbelief. Detectives in blue jackets peek, pride, and circle like clocks. White coats with clipboards scramble in and out. Temple police and neon windbreakers stalk the hallways. Nurses whoosh by, scrubs striding an urgent purpose. Bloody sneaker prints stamping the hallway vinyl. They don't let any of us go back to the trauma bays, not even your weeping mom. She snaps on the staff. I need to see him, she pleads with the front desk. She wears cornrows and an oversized black t-shirt that says no excuses. The O is a weight plate and the X are 2 crisscross barbells. The lady at the desk places a hand over her heart and shakes her head with sympathy. Her voice stern, her gaze gentle but on point. I'm sorry, man, really. Y'all not gonna let me go back there and see my son? Her thunderous mama bear voice breaks, cracks in heartbreak. Security surrounds the desk. Nikki, you have to let them do their job, Crystal says to your mom, rubbing her shoulders to calm her. Your mom is what my mom, your grandmother, calls a textured woman. Ina describes a textured woman as a woman with her hair plaited and then unplaited, with the ripples remaining as she sachets from corner to throne. Ina, who's just getting out of the hospital herself, wishes she could be here with you, but her illness, MSA, multiple systems atrophy, makes it too painful for her to travel. She says after a life devoted to dance and movement, that she can't count on her body anymore. I'm leaning over the edge of this dingy hospital lobby chair, repeating the same thing under heavy breath. Fight, fight. I accidentally bite my bottom lip because I say fight with a hard, violent F. Every time I say fight, T adds, rumble that, nephew. Fight. I can taste my blood. Rumble that, nephew. Fight. Rumble that, nephew. Crystal is shattered, stained glass. She paces in shards, her prayers at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit and rising. Under stress, glass absorbs all of the energy of an impact and then releases that energy into a zillion tiny pieces. She explains that her and your Uncle T have been at Temple from the get-go. The shooting is on the news. The whole lobby watches, Channel 6 and angst. They say you were one of 9 teenagers, 9, who were shot. 9 people shot is the definition of a mass shooting, right? But they don't call it that. They never call it that. Do you know why? Silence grips the ER as the TV flashes a crime scene with yellow tape and numerical evidence markers on the ground. I talk a little bit about being in the hospital room, but being in the hospital lobby, just so the book opens in that context, that you're in the hospital lobby, Nasir has been shot, and then we go back. And this is a really nice moment, because, you know, when you're from an area and then you go to a different area, you discover and you learn a lot, you know? And I have something very local in this book. The book mainly takes place in Philadelphia, right? But I want to take you somewhere else, okay? I want to take you somewhere else. So when I get the call that my nephew was shot, I start driving up from North Carolina, and I talk about that drive, just the kind of things you see, the Confederate flags and all that bullshit. So, so you know, but then I want to jump a little bit about and talk a little bit about North Carolina and just the context and give you some local stuff here. Because I talked about how they outlawed writing. And on my drive up from North Carolina to Philly, I listened to all my nephew's music. He had made so much music, and I listened to it before, but after he was shot, I was listening to it in a different way. Like almost like listening for clues, you know, because he says so much. All of his rhymes are autobiographical. You know, he's talking about his life and different things. And, you know, I told you about him talking about his dad, right? So he has a line, for example, in a song called Prosper. And Prosper is a reference to, you know, no weapon, you know, shall prosper. But he says, you know, take risk and prosper. I'm from the trenches. I ain't never have a father. You know, this is the hook for the song. This is the chorus, right? I'm take risk and prosper. I'm from the trenches. I ain't never have a father. So that's really a centerpiece of the song. My brother, on the other hand, has a song where he says, spent my prime doing time, diesel optimists. No father figures, so the bullets, they be popping us. That line from my brother is so deep because it also shows that he understands like the consequences of, you know, of what he's doing, you know? And so that's a really powerful line. But that's an example of what I mean about that conversation that they're having without having a conversation with each other, without even knowing each other. But anyway, this is all connected to this North Carolina thing I'm about to tell you. So I'm listening to all his music, and it's dope. It's, you know what I mean? He's a great artist. So I'm listening to it. I'm telling him, I'm talking to him about it. Contextualizing music, because it's important to understand that although you are in critical condition, Prosper pushes me to remember that beautiful thing with feathers that carried us this far. I think about how music, one of the things you do so well, possesses the power to heal. In ancient Egypt, the harp is used in healing temples. Modern scientific studies reveal that the vibrations from music lower our blood pressure, reduce our heart rate, relieve anxiety and pain, and can bring about an overall sense of peace. In ancient Greece, the god Apollo is not only the god of medicine, he's also the god of music as well. They build music-filled temples to harmonize the body. Nephew, you harmonize from the book of Isaiah with the depth and soul of a big-bone gospel singer from the deep south. Someone like Muddy Waters from Rolling Fork, Mississippi, or Odetta from Birmingham, Alabama, or a young Aretha Franklin at New Bethel Baptist Church in Detroit. I remember you playing the drums, backed by hand claps and church shoe stomps at Grandma Beverly's Macedonia Free Will Baptist Church in North Philly. That's my first glimpse at your ancestral rhythm and impeccable time. Your drumming pulsates through the wooden pews and stained glass of Macedonia and pours out onto the corner of 21st and Cecil B. Moore Avenue. Your drum is a voice that speaks our mother tongue, sending messages and warnings. Back in the days, the moment white Southern enslavers realized that Africans are not simply playing drums, but speaking drums to communicate, they criminalized our percussion. They actually banned the drums, outlawing our beats, spouting BS like, And then I have a quote from the Slave Code of South Carolina, Article 36. This was published in 1740. This is what I'm talking about when I said they actually sat down and, this is what they say. I can't do this in my regular voice, by the way. It is absolutely necessary to the safety of this province that all due care be taken to restrain Negroes from using or keeping of drums, which may call together or give sign or notice to one another of their wicked designs and purposes. So you couldn't gather in a group. This is if you were African, right, enslaved. You couldn't gather in a group. You couldn't play the drums. You couldn't read. You couldn't write. I mean, it's unbelievable the lengths to try to strip someone's humanity, dignity, to try to, create it's real deep, the lengths that, and again, reading it, sometimes we hear about those things like, oh yeah, you couldn't play the drums back, but then you actually read it like, no, this is really a law. But anyway, going back to what we're talking about here, I say to my nephew, your voice is the drum they fear. Your voice is freedom. It's your huru. I say, your use of water, because he uses water as a metaphor. I say, your use of water as a metaphor for trouble, for destructive wet blunts dipped in PCP laced embalming fluid, and for the streets is deep, because that's the essence of the original song. More than a song, wade in the water, just like our drums they banned, is a coded message. During their daring escapes from the hells of slavery, our ancestors would sing Wade in the Water to signal runaways to get off the trail and into the water to avoid being sniffed out by bloodhounds. See, I don't know if my nephew knew all that, so I'm, again, trying to put him on to some game about who he is. Not, you think you're a rapper from North Philly, right? But do you really know who you are? You know what I mean? Do you know where you come from? Do you know, as my grandma used to say, who you are and whose you are? Most black spirituals are codes and odes to freedom. Singing Follow the Drinking Gourd is code for the Big Dipper. It looks like a drinking gourd, which points to the North Star. Steal Away to Jesus is code for an upcoming escape plan. Sweet Chariot is code for the Underground Railroad. And you can imagine the enslavers saying, oh no, they're just singing some nice songs, no idea, right? Escapes, rebellions, and freedom are all encoded in our music. So then I start talking to him about, I remember a moment, he gave me all his music the last time he was in North Carolina, okay? And we had a moment where me and him were both, so we're in, my mind zooms to last month when we were together down in North Carolina. The big night sky is a clear, shimmery black. You look up at the stars gazing down on us. I almost forgot them Jones was up there, you tell me. It's hard to see him in Philly. I wonder if the city can make you forget about the stars, what else can it make you forget about? That kind of light pollution is called sky glow, I say. It's never truly dark. And maybe that's why the city never sleeps. See that star right there? Yeah, he says, that's the North Star. 2,000 times brighter than our sun. It's the only star in the constellation that doesn't travel across the sky, stays put, always points north. Our ancestors used that star as a guide when they were escaping these. I survey the surrounding acres, mature trees, babbling brooks, plantations all around here. I mean, it is North Carolina, I always remind myself. Then I recall hearing a clip of Malcolm X, who during his introduction of Mississippi native Fannie Lou Hamer put it like this. Some people wonder, well, what does Mississippi got to do with Harlem? It isn't actually Mississippi. It's America. America is Mississippi. There's no such thing as a Mason-Dixon line. It's America. There's no such thing as the South. It's America. It is America. Specifically, we're in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, nicknamed the southern part of heaven. Chapel Hill is the birthplace of George Moses Horton, a remarkable man and poet who was born enslaved in 1798. This is someone who I didn't know about until I moved down here. So this is what I meant when I said, like, when you come, first of all, there's so much history that we don't know and hasn't been written about. I mean, how many books has George Horton been in, right? But listen to George Horton. As a kid, Horton breaks the law by teaching himself how to read and write. So he did, he went against the law, taught himself how to read and write. He was enslaved. By the age of 20, Horton makes his way to the campus of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill to sell poetry for 75 cents a pop. love poems, death poems, religious poems. He becomes the go-to poet in Chapel Hill. So basically, you do something, your girl breaks up with you, you want to get back with her, you get Horton to write you a love poem, you act like you wrote it, you know what I mean? Appropriation, but this is what was happening. He was writing all of the death, funeral, or whatever notes he was writing, he was charging people. And you might say, well, if he was enslaved, how was he doing that? He had to pay his enslaver to allow him to go to, the campus for the day or whatever it might be. He would have to pay. Right? Since you're losing money on me, I have to pay you. So that's how that worked, in case you were wondering. But this dude is amazing. He uses the money, right, that he's getting from selling his poetry to publish his first book, The Hope of Liberty, in 1829, while still enslaved. Just think about that, though. Like, sometimes I read history and I just have to, just step back. He was enslaved when he wrote that book, and when it came out, he was still enslaved. It reminds me of when I read Asante Shakur's autobiography. It's one of my favorite books, by the way, Asante, which was written over 100 years after The Hope of Liberty. That's Horton's book. Asante writes, people get used to anything. The less you think about your oppression, the more your tolerance for it grows. After a while, people just think oppression is the normal state of things. But to become free, you have to be acutely aware of being a slave. Horton never got used to oppression and never lost sight of his mission to become free. He leveraged the success of his first book to publish 2 more books, The Poetical Works of George M. Horton, The Colored Bard of North Carolina, and Naked Genius. With 3 books under his belt, Horton then used his book money to purchase his freedom. A free man, Horton left Chapel Hill and headed north, where he settled in Philly, of course. Horton eventually left Philly after 2 decades and sailed to Liberia, Africa, his final resting place, home. There's a historical landmark plaque right down the road in Pittsburgh, North Carolina, on US 15501, which reads, and then I say. So, one of the things I wanted to do is definitely, bring that piece of history into this book. And into this book in general, it is a book where, like I said, I'm talking to my nephew, but there's a very rich history that I'm also explaining to him. Not just American history. Most of it has to actually do with our family, Similar to Buck, I interweave lyrics, but the lyrics are from him and his father, mainly. And there's some others, but mainly him and his father. But I also interweave something that's really profound. 2 things. One is, 3. This goes back to the 4-part harmony thing. So, 4-part harmony, where does that come from? It comes from this idea of layers and voices and a kind of symphonic, orchestra, right? So it's my voice, obviously, talking to him, but then there's his dad's voice. And you hear his dad's voice through the lyrics, and also you hear his dad's voice through his letters from prison. And so his dad's letters from prison are also interspersed throughout the book in different ways to, shed light on what's happening. Also, my mom's journal, similar to how, it was in Buck, her journal continues in this book too. So if you're familiar, and her voice is really distinct, and it slows everything down, and the way she writes is really profound. But she's also writing about her life and her history and her story, and connected to Nasir, obviously, my nephew. But that's also interspersed. And then the last voice is Bob. Bob was Nasir's father. Bob was Nasir's grandfather. He never met Bob. I never met Bob. My brother knew Bob. It was his dad. Bob is a really complex character. I grew up hating Bob, right? Because the only story I knew about Bob was he was abusive to my mom. So, you're abusive to my mom, I don't like you. You know what I mean? There's no way around that, right? If I see you, it's almost it's a problem. But at the same token, my brother kind of, growing up, my brother would celebrate Bob. Bob was the coolest. He had all the fly Kangos before they even hit the street. He was the mayor of the ghetto. He had all the fly lingo. He was just this cool dude. And I could see why my brother, in terms of how he talked about him, he knew everybody. He was a basketball player. He was tall, and And so, but like I said, I never liked Bob, because of that reason. And in this book, there are also letters. In 1972, Bob started writing a series of letters to God. They're probably like they're very profound. And they're probably the strongest anti-drug letters I've ever seen. He was a heroin addict. And he wrote these letters at the height of his addiction, high, while he was writing these letters. I'll give you an example of the first letter so you can kind of get a flavor for it. But Bob's Dear God letters are also interspersed into this book. So he starts them actually in June 71. Dear God, here's my situation as it stands now. Been in Buffalo 5 years this July 4th, a little ways from graduating. No income coming in other than cashing bad checks, borrowing from anybody and everybody, stealing from the gym, stealing from my girl, stealing from people's rooms on campus. No job, no home. I've had the opportunity to make a lot of contacts that might be helpful later on in life, but most people probably only have negative memories about me. Thoughts about a guy who God has given a lot of ability and talent and who hasn't taken advantage of any of it, just wasting his life away, really. All I've done is inject something into my veins of my body that gives me an excuse to cop out. All dope to me is a means to an end, and that end is self-destruction. See, I really don't think that good things are supposed to happen to me. I don't think I'm worthy. Ugly duckling. I'm someone who knows he has the ability, but who probably doesn't have the confidence and courage to put those abilities to the test. I once heard it said that a man who's afraid of being laughed at is a man who will never succeed. Capricorns are supposed to be afraid of taking risks, getting back to injecting that poison into my veins. See, I like to get as high as possible because getting high gives an avenue of escape from reality of my struggle with myself. Dope provides the biggest, longest suicidal avenue that I've ever come across. The feeling is so good, it makes you feel like you can kick all your problems with no sweat. And since I like to make things hard for myself, dope was appealing because you can continue to partake every day. Your body hollers for it. It seems to me that this is a one-way avenue because personally, I'm very seldom satisfied. I always want more, but I have to be careful in this description because I don't want to put too much blame on the drug. Like I said earlier, it's only a means to an end. The real problem is me and what I think of myself, how I perceive myself in relationship to the rest of the world. Bob. So that's 1971, June 1971. And so Bob starts these letters and they stop in 72, in June 72, when he goes to prison. And then there's a letter from prison that he writes to my mom that's also in this book. And a letter that my grandma writes to him. One of the coldest letters, I think, in history. My grandma is like a very matter-of-fact way of saying things. So she wrote him a letter, and I just couldn't get over how it started. It was just, she says, my grandma's a New Yorker. She's in her 90s. She's been in New York her whole life. And even when I try to get her to come down here, don't even think about moving down here, but even just visiting, it's just too quiet for her, She needs noise. She told me she needs the noise. And but she said, see if I can find it here. Anyway, it's in here. It is in here. But she says, yeah, I can't. It's in here. So trust me, it's in here. But she writes him a letter too, and so that's all in this book. So a lot of this to Nasir is, I didn't tell him about his dad back in the day because I didn't know what to say, and it's complicated because my brother. On the one hand, I wanted to tell him, like, yo, your dad is really amazing. Like, he's mad smart and he's talented but how could I really say that? You know what I mean? And then my feelings about my own brother started to change because I thought I used to look up to my brother. He was my idol. But now my childhood idol, is idling in childhood. That's what I'm seeing. So it's like, wow, all of that is so I start realizing, that keeping stuff from Nasir is actually very dangerous, because if you don't know that you're predisposed to something, then, you go along doing that thing, not understanding that, no, you already have a predisposition. You shouldn't be touching that, And so when I started seeing certain things, I realized he was repeating things that his dad had done. You know what I mean? And once I learned Bob's story, it changed me because it added humanity to Bob. I still had the feelings of, you touch my mom, it's on. So it still wanted to, still would step to him. But also I saw his humanity, because this was a dude, he wrote about, he said, one letter, he starts off, he says, I'm 25 years old, and my penis is a non-functioning organ of my body. This is a 25-year-old who's absolutely interested in nothing else other than drugs. My mom was the most beautiful woman in New York State. I mean, she was gorgeous. If you knew, she was she was just so gorgeous. And this person only saw her as someone to steal from and rob. She would have dance performances. She would put dances on for the community. It was all community-based, She would organize these dances for the community, and then he would come in and steal the money, so just horrible stuff. But you realize that it's the drugs, right? And the addiction and the disease of that. And so it gave it humanity. Another thought that I had writing this was he was doing all of that on heroin. Fentanyl is 100 times stronger. And like Philly and LA and wherever you go, this fentanyl is everywhere. And so it also made me kind of realize that. So I want to take some questions, and I want to take questions too, so we can kind of, I'm sure you might have some questions about Buck, Nephew, my process, parts of the story. I'm willing to talk about any of that or anything you want to know. But I just wanted to give you some context into like what Nephew is about. So it's about, and I will say my nephew does survive, and ultimately my nephew and my brother are brought together. And you have to kind of, I don't want to give that part away, but I will say he survives and that they're brought together, and that unification happens in this book. And so this book took a very long time to write, but it infuses family history, national history, and poetry, music, and healing for redemption. So that's kind of a something about Nephew. I wasn't gonna say a summary, not an overview. It's what I wanted to say about it right now. There's so much more aspects to it, but that's what I want to say. So anybody, I kind of want to, like I said, open up for questions and kind of, hear what you have to say, or hear what's on your mind. But that's Buck and Nephew, and I've done other projects. Maya Angelou was a mentor of mine, so that's what actually introduced me to North Carolina. Me and her made a film together called The Black Candle. That was many, many years ago, actually. But we made that film, and then she helped me with Buck when I was struggling with it. She told me what I needed to hear to help me finish Buck, and ultimately to be able to write this too. So, yeah. Thank you. So questions, comments? Yeah.
Just a comment.
Yep.
I love hearing you speak, but reading books is great, but also listening to your audiobook is even better, because I just feel like, I'm spending a lot of time with you and hearing it directly from you. Yeah. So I really appreciate the fact that you are recording the audiobook.
Yeah, thank you. Let me tell you something about that real quick. And there's actually, I just got it in the mail. This is like the audiobook too. So they have a CD. I'm like, do people still have CD players? Like I couldn't believe they got an actual CD. Like, shit's crazy. So anyway, but I was really like what? But to that point, my brother and my nephew both recorded in the same studio, which is called Wonderful Sound Studio, which is my studio. It's the studio that I own. And so in my studio, just so you know, Wonderful Sound Studio, we do audiobooks. So we did the audiobook for this in Wonderful Sound Studio, but we do like stuff for like last year and this year we're doing the Monday Night Football anthem. So if you heard like the song with Snoop Dogg and Chris Stapleton and Julie Santana, we do all the pre-production for that, the writing, all the the reference recording is done at our studio, and then we finish in LA. But so we do that. We did the ESPN. We did the 2021 NBA Finals. We did that in our studio. The pre-production for that in our studio. We co-wrote it with Spike Lee. We've done a couple audiobooks now, and then like I said, my brother used to record there, and my nephew records there actively. What else have we done there? We're doing a film right now with Idris Elba called called Paid in Full, which is about really reparations for Black artists in music, essentially. Billie Holiday getting paid $36 flat rate for for 4 songs. You know what I mean? Like this is criminal. Like, and her, all of the people who, their families, are not benefiting from any of this. Bessie Smith, all these people I've mentioned, and some of the people I mentioned in the book. So we work on stuff like that. So we did it in that studio. There's 4 voices on this audiobook. It's my voice doing, most of the narration, but then the lady who plays my mom in Buck audiobook, she's also doing a lot of the things that happen on Buck. I needed them to carry over. So if you notice, like the covers are similar because we got the same artist to do the same, Kevin to do the same, cover, because it's the same language, it's the same world. So the lady who did my mom's voice, her name is Adinrele Ojo. She's a really amazing voice actress, and actress as well. But her father was the founder of Freedom Theater in Philadelphia, if you've ever heard of that, which is a really important art center in Philadelphia. And then we have a guy named Dion Graham doing Bob's letters to God, because I realized, like the first day I was like, I thought I was gonna I'm like, I could read that, and then I'm like, no, you need a completely different human being to read these letters. You know what I mean? It's, you just realize the limitations sometimes, and something like that, and to give it the authenticity it needs, it has to be a completely different voice. So we got a guy named Dion, and then the very last voice on a nephew audiobook is my nephew. Yeah. So yeah, he ends it. So he's and that's how it is in the book. His words are, that's it. Yeah. So the book is, I also want to quickly say, it's a celebration of my nephew. The reason why he got shot so many times is because he was shielding his little cousins who were out there. There were like a lot of kids out there. And so that's why he got shot. So my nephew is a hero, like, and but who's gonna call him that if I don't call him that? You know what I mean? And I think that's one of the things that I think you learn about. Like going back to George Horton. Who's gonna write about George Horton? They haven't written about him all this time, you know what I mean? I never learned about him growing up in Philly. I never knew that there was. So again, that's where I make an observation, you have an obligation. You gotta do it. Wait for somebody else to do it, it'll never get done. That's how me and Maya Angelou connected, because she said, you gotta make what you wanna see. And don't wait for them to do it. They're never gonna do it. Whoever they is, they not doing it. So you gotta do it. And that's really like the impetus for what I'm saying to my nephew, But yeah, that question inspired all that. Thank you. But yeah, the audio book was a real pleasure to work on. I really like the doing audio books, and I like it because people they do their workouts, and next thing you know, they know the whole story. You know what I mean? So, or they do their run or whatever they're doing in commutes. So, yeah. Other questions?
Yeah, these are two personal works, you know, your family. Have you ever had issues with a friend or family member who kind of took issue with how they were portrayed in it? Because some of the being put out to the public, how do you deal with that? So.
Well, definitely. You know, I think that's the reason why when I was writing, but people used to say like, so did you, like when I was working on it, they would say like, did you let like people read it like before you publish it? No, like why would I do that? Like, do you know everybody would literally come to me like, yo, yeah, it's cool and all, but okay, could you change, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's not what we're doing. We're not doing, you want to give me how you want it. That you can't write like that. You know what I mean? So in order to be free, you can't really, for me, now I will say, the only time I have ever let people read, because first of all, I don't even let my editors read when I'm working. Like when I'm really in it, I'm just I'll holler at you later. Like I'll send you the full book, but just let me do my thing. So I don't usually let people in when I'm in that place. But after I finish the book, before my editor read it, my nephew read it. And I say, if you good with it, then we're good. And he was good with it. So that's I cared about that. But generally I've never the story has always really taken precedent over everything else. Meaning, you know, and like I said, my mom was the one who encouraged me to use the journal entries in hers. So I felt like, you know, that was going. She really but yeah, I have had issues where people feel like, you know, this or that, you know, and yeah, I think I get it, because, you know, if you're writing about someone, and again, you're observing it from your perspective and things like that, you know, it might not always go over well, but I've always tried to be a servant to the story, and not to your egos and all that, because I'm serving the story, you know what I mean? And it doesn't always make me look good, it doesn't always make this person look good, but it's again, going back to Bob's humanity. You may think that someone seeing you in this light is actually a negative thing, but it's actually a positive thing, right? Now they're seeing your humanity, right? In a way that maybe they never saw before. So, you know, the people that I write about, and I think my family also knows too, like, you know, watch what you say around MK, because, you know, it might end up in a book. No, I'm just joking. It's not like that. Like, but yeah, but you know, it's true that, you know, I think I talked about Dr. Angelo being a source of inspiration, a mentor. You know, she wrote about her life. That was the main subject. Because that's what she, you know, it's just so rich, you know it so well, right? And I think all writers do. I was just doing a thing with a fantasy writer the other day, and we were talking about how his stuff is autobiographical too, even though it may not look like that from the surface. It's all autobiographical, no matter what you write, you know? But yeah, so I think that the answer is yes, but that's the reason why I don't let people like read it first and give me their feedback so they can want me to change everything, you know. I don't even open that door. They can like once the book is out, then they can give me their perspective and we can talk about it. And that's happened before. And it's also happened before where someone thought I was like too hard on them, but I was like easy on them. So like, you know, it's like, damn, bro, like you don't know, like I could have really went there, but I was trying to like, you know, but again, I think just people aren't necessarily used to being in a book. And even like I give you a story, like my brother, like when I first did Buck, you know, I told him like, yeah, I'm doing this book, and you know, and it was all cool. But sometimes like just fast forward to me having a conversation with him thinking like, you know, him not really seeing it, understanding that, okay, once a book is out, you really don't know what's going to happen with it. You know what I mean? So before then, I had written like some poetry books and like a nonfiction book about hip hop. And Buck was just so much bigger than all those books. So I think you also aren't always prepared for just like the amount of people who might now know about your story or know about your family and that kind of thing. But it all comes with it. And yeah, it's definitely happened like that before. But all my my relationships with my family and the people I write about are strong and good and healthy. I talk to these people. These are my people. So, you know, my mom passed in 2021, but she was probably one of my biggest supporters. And this was her bag here, which people always ask me about. But this was her bag. My mom was into aesthetics very much. She taught aesthetics and African aesthetics, and you know, she didn't curse. In fact, she would say, say, sweetheart, you know, I don't curse. I don't like to curse. I never curse. I never heard her curse. I never curse. But I just love the way that black people say motherfucker. And then she would just, you know, she would go on about how many different ways that we could say it. Like, oh man, you motherfucker. You know, she would do all these iterations, and she just, what she loved is the aesthetics. You know, she would watch basketball with me or football, and she'd love the aesthetics, the way the brothers dance when they score, the things that we do to just everyday things again, and elevating it to a sense of art, right? She saw it as art. He's not just dribbling regular, right? He's not just dribbling the ball like this, you know what I mean? It's a dance that he's doing with it. And if you don't, it's a rhythm, and if you don't have it, it's something that you can look at it and say, oh, he's just dribbling. But actually what he's doing is, you know, he's connecting to the creator or something. He's doing something divine, you know? And, you know, so anyway, so that's how she looked at art and stuff like that. Yeah. Other questions, comments, thoughts? It could be about Buck, Nephew, or any other stuff. Yeah.
Your writing is really raw, like you kind of let it all out. Does that, you find people who are involved in your stories, is that ever healing for them, hurtful for them, combination of the two?
Yeah, so I think that my writing, raw is a good word to some extent. But you know, I guess there's different types of raw, right? Because there's like raw that can make you sick, and then there's like you know, sushi's raw, and there's different raw things that you can eat and you feel really good, you know? So I think my rawness is always rooted in healing. Like again, going back to observation, obligation, the reason why I write, the reason why I'm an artist is to heal, to promote healing, to inspire. So all of it is, you know, like even with this story, even though there's darkness in the story, you kind of need to go through the darkness to get to the light. The light is always there. Same thing with Buck. You know, the light is there, but you do have to go through the muck and the mire to get there, you know, and that's, to me, it's metaphoric, you know, of what we all have to kind of go through, you know, to find that light, that truth. Yeah.
You have a next project in mind?
You know, that's crazy to me. That's a great question. But isn't it crazy that you spend so much time? You know how much time I spent on this book? You know, like, and then as soon as it's out, it's like, yo, when's the next joint? Like,
I apologize.
No, it's all good. No, it's a great question, and I have a series of books that I'm working on. So I usually work on a few at the same time, and then whatever one kind of just wins me over at that moment, I'll finish. But yeah, I'm working on a few. But I'm also, you know, still trying to, you know, this just came out, so we got, you know. But yeah, that's a great question. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
One other comment.
Yeah.
You know, when you were just talking about reading books being banned, and then the drums being banned in the book, the only thing that went to my mind immediately is books being banned now, and just thinking, you know, you're just talking about the history, but we're not out of the history.
Great point. I'm not wearing it today, but I've been wearing my Banned Books Club shirt at a lot of my events. This is not clean today, so I could. I debated it, but figured, I go clean. But it was, I was like, oh, I like the message, you know what I mean? So I had to choose, like, so absolutely right. Me and my dad, my Buck was banned. So when Buck came out, it got banned in of all places, Baltimore. It's crazy. How you get banned in Baltimore? Like, crazy. Anyway, it got unbanned, but it was banned for a minute. It was on the news. It was a whole thing. I had to go to, it was a whole crazy. My dad's book, my dad writes, mostly academic books. And his books have been banned. He's on the list in Florida. But when we get on those lists, we're happy. It means that you're doing something good, to be on some of those lists. Maya Angelou was the most banned author in America. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We are still living. Columbia Law Review, they don't even have their website up. They don't like the article, so they just nuked the whole website. We're living in a time we see the students being attacked for protesting. We're living in a very weird time where we're going back and back and back. All the people's rights are being rolled back, and it's like, so I think it's really important, like this time right now, to be loud, to be vocal, to stand up for each other, to not, because what you see happening, like I said, is just an attack on freedom of speech, freedom of what you want to read, freedom of your body, all of these things. And so, it's real. And but so part of what I'm doing in this book, real quick, I want to say, the art that I'm promoting should be resourceful, should be practical, beautiful, and emancipatory. That's the kind of art that I want to make. That's the kind of art that I talk about. The Black women who made the quilts in the antebellum times, they made these quilts that were coded and had all this, I talk about it in here, so I won't do it here, but see? I think it's time for me to walk back in. Are we good, Alex? Okay, cool. Yeah, if you guys want to talk more, I'll be over here at the table.